Thank you so much, Nancy, for being willing to share this great presentation with us. And can't wait to hear it. So I'm going to also go off so we can just focus on you.
Oh, well, there you go.
Okay.
Thank you, all you awesome teachers. This is so fun. I'm going to share, I have a PowerPoint. We'll see if it works. Let's see. We're talking about practicing and performing, and just to kind of get us going, last week I just accidentally saw a YouTube video by Mark Andre Hamlin, and I sent this to the faculty because it just really impressed me. And it's a great interview, and it's a YouTube channel called Living the Classical Life. So it's just amazing. And he said, to me, a performance is not an exhibition, it's an offering. Isn't that wonderful? It's not an exhibition, it's an offering. And I think so often we can get bogged down in all the details. So I shared that with my students here at Dixie, and that helped a few of them because they had a concert, and we all get nervous and all of that. And so let me just tell a couple of stories. If you've heard these, forgive me, but it just kind of is my segue into what we're going to talk about. So years ago, when I was doing doctoral studies in Kansas City, I taught for the community ed division, and I had a cute little student, and nobody will ever know who he is. But he struggled and was a beginner, and I had to spoon feed a lot. And he's the kind of student, didn't practice much and whatever and all this. And we had a festival every spring, like a lot of people do. So I thought, I'm going to get him ready, and that'll be something to work for. And it was just a little 2-liner piece out of a, level 1 or prep level. And we worked on it for several weeks. And when he went to play for the judge, I was out in the hallway, and they were in a little room with the judge. And he played his piece 10 times. And I sat there, and after the second time I thought, oh, he's repeating. And then he just kept going, which of course the piece was so short, and it gave the judge time to write comments. But I realized, I thought, you know what? I've been having him practice the piece 10 times a day. And so when he went to play for the judge, he played it 10 times. And that was a huge wake-up call for me, that how am I preparing students for that experience of whatever the experience is, if they're on the stage or playing for a judge or whatever. And so I've never forgotten that, and I try to make very clear my instructions on practicing and performing, or practice performing, and how all of that goes. And so that's kind of fun. Where's my little thing? When we talk about performing, another little phrase I like is the performance space. And years ago, I had a student who, after the senior recital, said to me, and she had done tons of, prep for that, and performed for family, for friends, and getting all of that. But on the night of the recital, and she did well, but she talked to me later and said, nothing could have prepared me for this, because and I said, what do you mean? And she said, she was surprised at the nerves she felt, where she had been practicing and performing in classes and performing for friends and doing run-throughs, but when it came down to the day, it just felt so different. And obviously we know that performing takes a lot of experience, and we've got to do it. And some people are more naturally inclined than others. Another experience with a very, very talented student after her recital, she looked at me and she said, I had no idea of the mental energy that this would require. And what's interesting is she was one of those students who memorized very easily. I mean, I didn't have to dream up all of these ways to help her memorize. It just came, and she was a good practicer and all of that. But again, the mental energy when you're on that stage is pretty amazing. So then one last little example. A student of mine played the Rachmaninoff Second Concerto third movement with the Southwest Symphony many years ago, a lot of years ago. And when he was preparing that, one day it came into his lesson, he said, I've got to practice different. I'm doing all these repetitions. I've got sections and I've got all of this, and I'll go through some practice tips in a few minutes. But I sat there and looked at it, and we had the whole movement divided in phrases and sections. And then we had 4 big, large sections. We had all of that. And he just said, when I practice the way I should, I could practice half of the movement for 4 hours. And you can't do that every day. Well, you can. And so we started talking, and I asked him a lot of questions about, how he was doing this or that, the other, because we worked through all of this in the lesson. And so I put him on this little kind of a plan leading up to the performance. So we had about 3 months, and I had him we scheduled like these large sections. So that section was probably 7 or 8 pages long, large. And then we had it divided up into phrases and then in pages and things like that. And so I would say, okay, so on Monday, you're going to play the first big section for 2 hours. You're going to do small lines at a time and all the different tempos and all these practice tips. And then you're also going to do section 2, but you're going to practice a page at a time. And then you're on section 3, you're going to practice the whole big deal. And I started cycling through that and and of course, things come up, you have practice spots and all that. And by just changing things up and giving him tons of variety, all of a sudden his practice got more energized, and it was just wonderful. So that's kind of one of the things that I do when we're in that review phase, which we'll go in a minute. So let me do now just a little review of learning pieces. So, our goal is to perform. And by the way, if anyone has a question, just kind of, I don't know, how do we do that? Somebody raise hand, or maybe periodically I'll ask for questions. One thing I like to do with students is to kind of take a piece in phases. So the introductory phase is to study up on the piece, the composer, listen to recordings, and then watch and look at the music, see what key we're in, see what time signature, what's the form, and how is it made, what's the mood, what's the mood. And that if we're teaching a short 1-page intermediate piece, that it won't take very long, but it's fun to see what happens with the students when they learn a little bit about, what is a ballade, or what is a sonatina, or that or the other, and tell them a little bit about the composer. They seem to like that. So I love to give them an introduction, and then then we sit down and learn it. And the first thing to do is sight read. And that's always it can be surprising to have a student sight read in the lesson, and then you realize, oh my goodness, we have work to do. So, but then they have some idea of what's going on, and then we launch into the very basic details. Now, you can do a lot more than fingering rhythm and notes, but that to me is absolutely essential right in the beginning, because if we've got rhythm issues, then a lot of the other things aren't going to come in with that. And my goal with a student is to get them into being able to play the piece from beginning to end. So they're doing the arabesque by Burkmüller. When they can play that all the way through, I don't care how slow it is. In fact, I like it slow initially. Then they've got it learned. And until they can play the whole piece through, they're stuck in this developmental phase. I have an intermediate student right now who everything else in her life is more exciting than piano. And she and I have a really good relationship. And she had a piece, and just kind of, it was always last on her lists. And then she was learning this for the evaluation. She was learning something else. And she had a piece that was just kind of stuck. And I looked at her one day and said, "You've got to be able to play this from beginning to end." And that was kind of a shocker. And she realized that she was stuck on the last page. And lo and behold, finally that next week, after all these weeks of kind of being stuck on it, that one goal, let's just play from beginning to end, it got her to the end of the piece. And then now we're working on all the other stuff. So I have found with students who kind of inhale music, or they're really driven and they love it, they're going to sail through this phase. But if they get stuck, this can help them understand we're just trying to get the basics here, and here we go. So, and then the third phase, once you get past all the basics, then launch into all the musical details, the dynamics, articulation, tempo, phrasing, ornamentation, pedaling. And it depends on the student. I don't always start the pedal right away. I had a student playing the Beethoven Sonata in C minor, Opus 10, number 1, first movement. And we're using an edition that has a little bit of pedaling in it. And I have had her not do any at all, because I'm very, very picky with Beethoven. And at the beginning of the lesson, she said, "When are we going to do pedal?" And I said, "Well, we're going to do it when we're ready." And with Beethoven, again, if you start that too soon, that things get muddy and all of that. That's just my opinion. So she wanted to try a phrase with pedaling. And so I showed her a few things. And then she proceeded to play in the lesson. She followed the pedaling that was in there meticulously. And again, this is the editor. This is not Beethoven. It's not me either. But it really tripped her up. And finally I said, "Okay, let's take out the pedaling and let's do these other things." And so again, and on the flip side, I have students who can put pedaling in very early and they're fine, and then other students who can't. And so that's depending on the composer, and all of that is what I do. So in this perfecting stage, becoming very proficient, we're working a lot on tempo and getting all of the wonderful musical details that make a piece what it should be. And also, when I say mastery phase, that's when we're getting the short-term memory. A lot of times, in fact, most of the time, they're working on memory at the same time that they're doing all these nitty-gritty musical details. But I have found that if there's any issues with accuracy, and I'm having them memorize too soon, they memorize it incorrectly. And so I'm very careful that everything is in place before we work on the memory. And again, that's a personal thing. I had teachers who made me memorize right away from week 1, and I had other teachers who didn't care and let me choose. So there's that. And then and I love putting pieces in that last phase, the review phase. And I have found with students, and it's not hard and fast rule, but once they've performed something, I mean, a public performance 3 different times, that piece becomes part of them. It's part of their DNA, and it kind of launches into their long-term memory. And so we do that on, and then taking that another step, it's also nice to have a student is coming up on a little festival, and her piece wasn't quite ready, and so we pulled one out that she's actually played a couple of different times, and it came back so fast. And so once you've got something, you performed it a few times, you let it sleep, then you come back, and it's great. It's great the second time, and then it's even better the third time. And I have pieces in my repertoire that if I've performed several times, especially with breaks in between, I could play it almost at any time. So that's fun. Does anyone have any questions up to this point?